Officer Sarah Martinez had been walking the downtown beat for 8 years, but she had never seen anything quite like this. It was a cold Tuesday morning in November when she first noticed the small figures darting between the abandoned warehouses on Industrial Avenue. At first glance, they looked like shadows moving in the early dawn light, but something about their hurried movements caught her attention. Her German Shepherd partner, Rex, immediately sensed her heightened alertness. The 4-year-old police dog had been trained to detect everything from drugs to explosives, but his most valuable skill was reading people. Rex's ears perked up as he watched the distant figures, his nose twitching as he caught unfamiliar scents carried on the morning breeze. Sarah had grown up in this neighborhood before it became a maze of empty buildings and broken dreams. She knew every alley, every shortcut, and every hiding place that local kids used to play in. But these weren't local kids playing games. These children moved with a purpose that seemed far too serious for their young ages. The first child she managed to get a clear look at couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He was dragging a heavy bag that seemed to weigh almost as much as he did. His clothes were dirty and too big for his small frame, hanging off his shoulders like hand-me-downs that had been passed down too many times. What struck Sarah most was the way he kept looking over his shoulder, as if he was afraid someone might be following him. Rex began to pull gently on his leash, wanting to investigate further. The dog's instincts were rarely wrong, and Sarah had learned to trust them completely. They had solved dozens of cases together, from finding missing persons to uncovering drug operations. Rex's gentle nature with children had made him a favorite at school visits, but Sarah could see that his protective instincts were now fully engaged. As they moved closer to the warehouse district, Sarah noticed more children. They appeared to be working, but not in any way that made sense for kids their age. Some were sorting through piles of materials that looked like recycled electronics. Others were carrying boxes that seemed far too heavy for them to manage safely. All of them looked tired, hungry, and afraid. Sarah called for backup, but she knew it would take time for other officers to arrive. The warehouse district was on the far edge of their patrol area, and morning shift change meant fewer units were immediately available. She decided to observe from a distance, documenting what she saw while waiting for additional support. What she witnessed over the next hour changed everything she thought she knew about child labor in her city. These weren't kids helping out at family businesses or doing chores for spending money. These children were working under conditions that would be illegal for adults, let alone minors. They moved with the exhausted efficiency of people who had been doing the same tasks for far too long. Rex remained perfectly still beside her, but Sarah could feel the tension in his body. The dog's natural protective instincts toward children were warring with his training to wait for commands. She could see in his eyes that he understood something was very wrong with this situation. The breakthrough came when one of the smaller children stumbled and fell while carrying a box. The sound echoed through the quiet morning air, and Sarah watched as the other children immediately rushed to help. But instead of adult supervision or care, what followed was harsh shouting from inside one of the buildings. The children's reaction was immediate and telling. They cowered together, fear written clearly across their young faces. Sarah made her decision. She couldn't wait any longer for backup. These children needed help now, and she and Rex were the only ones in position to provide it. She began moving closer to the warehouses, her radio ready to call for emergency assistance if the situation escalated. Rex stayed close by her side, his training keeping him calm despite his obvious desire to protect the children they were watching. As they approached the first warehouse, Sarah could hear adult voices coming from inside. The tone was harsh and demanding, clearly giving orders rather than providing guidance or care. She positioned herself where she could see through a broken window, and what she observed inside made her blood run cold. This wasn't just child labor. This was systematic exploitation of homeless children who had nowhere else to go. The adults inside were treating these kids like unpaid workers, forcing them to sort and process materials in unsafe conditions. Sarah realized she was looking at a criminal operation that had been hidden in plain sight, using society's most vulnerable children as free labor. Rex sensed the change in Sarah's emotional state and pressed closer to her side. The dog's presence was both comforting and empowering. She knew that whatever happened next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. Together they were about to uncover something that would shake their entire community and bring justice to children who had been forgotten by almost everyone else. Sarah's radio crackled to life as backup units finally arrived in the warehouse district. Detective Mike Chen was the first to reach her position, followed by 2 patrol cars and a social services van that Sarah had specifically requested. She briefed them quickly on what she had observed, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her chest. Rex had remained perfectly still during their hour-long surveillance, but now the German Shepherd was showing signs of agitation. His ears were constantly moving, tracking sounds coming from multiple directions around the warehouse complex. Sarah realized that the operation was much larger than what they could see from their current position. Detective Chen took charge of coordinating the response, but he made it clear that Sarah and Rex would be taking the lead on making contact with the children. Their partnership was well known throughout the department for its success in handling sensitive situations involving young people. Rex's gentle demeanor had a way of putting scared children at ease, even in the most difficult circumstances. The plan was simple, but required careful timing. Sarah and Rex would approach the children working outside the warehouses, while other officers positioned themselves to prevent any adults from escaping or interfering. Social services would be standing by to immediately care for any children they found, ensuring they wouldn't be traumatized further by the arrest process. As they moved into position, Sarah noticed that one little girl, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, had been watching them from behind a stack of cardboard boxes. The child's eyes were wide with fear, but there was also something else there, a flicker of hope that maybe help had finally arrived. Rex was the first to make contact. Moving slowly and deliberately, the police dog approached the hiding spot where the little girl was crouched. Instead of his usual alert posture, Rex lowered himself to the ground and crawled forward on his belly, making himself as non-threatening as possible. This wasn't something he had been specifically trained to do. It was pure instinct, the dog's natural understanding that this child needed gentleness above all else. The girl didn't run when Rex reached her hiding place. Instead, she stretched out one small, dirty hand and let the German Shepherd sniff her fingers. What happened next brought tears to Sarah's eyes and would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. Rex gently licked the child's hand, then carefully positioned himself between her and the warehouse where the adult voices could still be heard shouting orders. Sarah approached slowly, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. She identified herself as a police officer, but she was careful to explain that she and Rex were there to help, not to get anyone in trouble. The little girl's response broke Sarah's heart. In a voice barely above a whisper, the child asked if she was going to be arrested for not working hard enough. That single question revealed the depth of psychological manipulation these children had endured. They had been convinced that they were criminals, that the work they were being forced to do was somehow their responsibility and obligation. Sarah knelt down to the child's eye level and gently explained that she had done nothing wrong, that no child should ever be forced to work in such conditions. Meanwhile, other officers had made contact with more children throughout the warehouse complex. The pattern was the same everywhere. Kids between the ages of 6 and 14, all clearly homeless, all working in dangerous conditions for no pay. Some had been there for weeks, others for months. All of them were malnourished, exhausted, and terrified of getting in trouble with the adults who controlled their daily lives. Rex seemed to understand his role without any commands from Sarah. The dog moved from child to child, offering comfort and reassurance through his calm presence. Several of the children began talking once Rex was near them, as if the dog's acceptance gave them permission to trust the police officers who had arrived with him. The investigation revealed that the operation was run by a network of adults who specifically targeted homeless children in the downtown area. They would approach kids who were sleeping in alleys or under bridges, offering them food and a place to stay in exchange for just a little help with some work. Once the children were isolated in the warehouse district, the adults would gradually increase their demands while making it clear that the kids had nowhere else to go. Sarah learned that many of these children had been living on the streets for months before being recruited into the labor operation. Some had run away from abusive homes. Others had aged out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. All of them had been surviving day by day when the warehouse operators found them and offered what seemed like a better alternative to sleeping in doorways and digging through garbage for food. As more details emerged, Sarah realized that Rex's gentle response to the children wasn't just instinctive kindness. It was exactly what these kids needed to begin trusting adults again. Many of them had been betrayed by every adult they had encountered since becoming homeless. Rex's unconditional acceptance and protection opened the door for them to start believing that maybe, just maybe, there really were people who wanted to help them without expecting anything in return. The first child Rex had comforted turned out to be named Maria. She had been living in the warehouses for 3 months after running away from a foster home where she had been mistreated. Maria told Sarah that Rex reminded her of a dog her family had owned before everything went wrong in her life. For the first time in months, she felt safe enough to tell an adult the truth about what had been happening to her and the other children. Sarah's radio crackled to life as backup units finally arrived in the warehouse district. Detective Mike Chen was the first to reach her position, followed by 2 patrol cars and a social services van that Sarah had specifically requested. She briefed them quickly on what she had observed, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her chest. Rex had remained perfectly still during their hour-long surveillance, but now the German Shepherd was showing signs of agitation. His ears were constantly moving, tracking sounds coming from multiple directions around the warehouse complex. Sarah realized that the operation was much larger than what they could see from their current position. Detective Chen took charge of coordinating the response, but he made it clear that Sarah and Rex would be taking the lead on making contact with the children. Their partnership was well known throughout the department for its success in handling sensitive situations involving young people. Rex's gentle demeanor had a way of putting scared children at ease, even in the most difficult circumstances. The plan was simple but required careful timing. Sarah and Rex would approach the children working outside the warehouses, while other officers positioned themselves to prevent any adults from escaping or interfering. Social services would be standing by to immediately care for any children they found, ensuring they wouldn't be traumatized further by the arrest process. As they moved into position, Sarah noticed that one little girl, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, had been watching them from behind a stack of cardboard boxes. The child's eyes were wide with fear, but there was also something else there, a flicker of hope that maybe help had finally arrived. Rex was the first to make contact. Moving slowly and deliberately, the police dog approached the hiding spot where the little girl was crouched. Instead of his usual alert posture, Rex lowered himself to the ground and crawled forward on his belly, making himself as non-threatening as possible. This wasn't something he had been specifically trained to do. It was pure instinct, the dog's natural understanding that this child needed gentleness above all else. The girl didn't run when Rex reached her hiding place. Instead, she stretched out one small, dirty hand and let the German Shepherd sniff her fingers. What happened next brought tears to Sarah's eyes and would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. Rex gently licked the child's hand, then carefully positioned himself between her and the warehouse where the adult voices could still be heard shouting orders. Sarah approached slowly, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. She identified herself as a police officer, but she was careful to explain that she and Rex were there to help, not to get anyone in trouble. The little girl's response broke Sarah's heart. In a voice barely above a whisper, the child asked if she was going to be arrested for not working hard enough. That single question revealed the depth of psychological manipulation these children had endured. They had been convinced that they were criminals, that the work they were being forced to do was somehow their responsibility and obligation. Sarah knelt down to the child's eye level and gently explained that she had done nothing wrong, that no child should ever be forced to work in such conditions. Meanwhile, other officers had made contact with more children throughout the warehouse complex. The pattern was the same everywhere. Kids between the ages of 6 and 14, all clearly homeless, all working in dangerous conditions for no pay. Some had been there for weeks, others for months. All of them were malnourished, exhausted, and terrified of getting in trouble with the adults who controlled their daily lives. Rex seemed to understand his role without any commands from Sarah. The dog moved from child to child, offering comfort and reassurance through his calm presence. Several of the children began talking once Rex was near them, as if the dog's acceptance gave them permission to trust the police officers who had arrived with him. The investigation revealed that the operation was run by a network of adults who specifically targeted homeless children in the downtown area. They would approach kids who were sleeping in alleys or under bridges, offering them food and a place to stay in exchange for just a little help with some work. Once the children were isolated in the warehouse district, the adults would gradually increase their demands while making it clear that the kids had nowhere else to go. Sarah learned that many of these children had been living on the streets for months before being recruited into the labor operation. Some had run away from abusive homes, others had aged out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. All of them had been surviving day by day when the warehouse operators found them and offered what seemed like a better alternative to sleeping in doorways and digging through garbage for food. As more details emerged, Sarah realized that Rex's gentle response to the children wasn't just instinctive kindness. It was exactly what these kids needed to begin trusting adults again. Many of them had been betrayed by every adult they had encountered since becoming homeless. Rex's unconditional acceptance and protection opened the door for them to start believing that maybe, just maybe, there really were people who wanted to help them without expecting anything in return. The first child Rex had comforted turned out to be named Maria. She had been living in the warehouses for 3 months after running away from a foster home where she had been mistreated. Maria told Sarah that Rex reminded her of a dog her family had owned before everything went wrong in her life. For the first time in months, she felt safe enough to tell an adult the truth about what had been happening to her and the other children. 3 weeks after the warehouse rescue, Sarah received a call that would test everything she and Rex had learned about helping traumatized children. Maria, the 8-year-old girl who had been the first to trust Rex, was struggling in her new foster placement and had specifically asked if she could see the police dog who had helped rescue her. The foster family, Tom and Linda Rodriguez, were experienced caregivers who had been working with the social services system for over 10 years. However, they admitted to being overwhelmed by Maria's nightmares and panic attacks. The little girl would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced that the warehouse operators had found her and were forcing her back to work. Sarah and Rex made their first unofficial visit to the Rodriguez home on a Saturday morning. The moment Maria saw Rex walking up the front steps, her entire demeanor changed. The withdrawn, fearful child that the foster parents had been caring for suddenly came alive, running to the door and kneeling down to embrace the German shepherd who had become her symbol of safety and hope. Rex responded with the same gentle instincts he had shown during the rescue. He allowed Maria to bury her face in his fur while she cried tears that she had been holding back for weeks. The dog remained perfectly still, providing a warm, living comfort that no human could offer in quite the same way. For 20 minutes, Maria held on to Rex while her foster parents and Sarah watched in amazement. When Maria finally looked up, she began talking about her experiences in the warehouses in detail. For the first time since the rescue, she told them about the other children who had been too scared to eat the small portions of food they were given. She described how the operators would threaten to throw them back onto the streets if they complained about being tired or hungry. Most importantly, she shared her terror that somehow someday she would end up back in that place. Sarah realized that Rex's presence was unlocking trauma that Maria needed to process in order to heal. She contacted Dr. Williams, the pediatrician who had examined the rescued children, and asked about the possibility of incorporating Rex into therapy sessions for the kids who were struggling with their recovery. Dr. Williams was immediately interested in the idea. She had been following up with all 14 children and had noticed that the ones who asked about Rex were generally having more difficulty adjusting to their new lives. She theorized that the dog had become a bridge between their traumatic experiences and their hope for safety, making him an essential part of their healing process. Within a week, Sarah and Rex were visiting 3 different foster homes and 2 group facilities where the rescued children were living. Each visit revealed new aspects of how the warehouse experience had affected these kids, and how Rex's presence helped them process their emotions in ways that traditional therapy alone couldn't achieve. 12-year-old Marcus, who had been living under the highway overpass, had developed an intense fear of enclosed spaces. His new foster family had been struggling to help him sleep in a bedroom, as he would panic and insist on sleeping outside or in the hallway. When Rex visited, Marcus was able to stay in his room for the first time since his rescue. As long as the German shepherd was lying on the floor beside his bed, the success of these informal visits led to an official partnership between the police department and the county's social services agency. Sarah and Rex were assigned to a new program specifically designed to help trafficking and exploitation victims. with Rex becoming the first certified therapy dog in the department's history. The training process for Rex's new role took 2 months and required Sarah to learn alongside her partner. They studied animal-assisted therapy techniques, trauma-informed care approaches, and specialized protocols for working with children who had experienced severe abuse and neglect. Rex's natural empathy and intelligence made him an ideal candidate for the additional training. But Sarah was amazed by how much the dog seemed to understand about his expanded responsibilities. Meanwhile, the legal case against the warehouse operators was moving through the court system. Sarah found herself serving as a witness in multiple hearings and depositions, recounting the details of the rescue operation and the conditions they had found. The defense attorneys tried to argue that the children were willing participants who had benefited from having shelter and regular work. But the medical evidence and testimony from the children themselves painted a clear picture of systematic exploitation. Rex played an unexpected role in the legal proceedings as well. Several of the children were required to testify about their experiences, which was traumatic for kids who had already been through so much. The court allowed Rex to be present during their testimony, providing emotional support that helped them find the courage to speak truthfully about what had happened to them. Judge Patricia Morrison, who was presiding over the case, was initially skeptical about allowing a dog in her courtroom. However, after seeing how Rex's presence affected the children's ability to participate in the legal process, she became a strong advocate for animal-assisted support in cases involving young victims of crime. The media attention surrounding the case had brought unexpected benefits for other vulnerable children in the community. Local businesses began donating money and resources to expand programs for homeless youth, and several new foster families came forward offering to provide homes specifically for children aging out of the system. Sarah found herself becoming a spokesperson for the issue of child labor exploitation, speaking at community meetings and conferences about the warning signs that adults should watch for. She always brought Rex with her to these presentations, as his presence seemed to make the topic more approachable for audiences who might otherwise feel overwhelmed by the reality of what children in their own community had experienced. The partnership between Sarah and Rex had evolved from traditional police work into something entirely new, a bridge between law enforcement, social services, and therapeutic support that was helping to redefine how society cared for its most vulnerable young people. But their biggest challenge was still ahead of them, as they prepared to help the rescued children face their traffickers in court and finally find the justice they deserved. The day of the trial arrived 6 months after the warehouse rescue, and Sarah could feel the tension in the courthouse hallway. 8 of the 14 rescued children would be testifying against their former captors, and despite months of therapy and preparation, they were understandably terrified about facing the adults who had controlled and exploited them. Rex had spent the previous week visiting each child who would be testifying, helping them practice walking into a courtroom and sitting in a witness chair. The German Shepherd's calm presence had been crucial in helping them overcome their fear of the formal legal environment. But today would be the real test of their courage and recovery. Maria, now 9 years old and thriving in her foster home, was scheduled to be the first child witness. She had grown taller and healthier over the past months, but as she sat in the hallway waiting to be called, she looked very much like the frightened 8-year-old who had hidden behind cardboard boxes in the warehouse district. Her foster mother, Linda Rodriguez, held her hand while Rex lay calmly at her feet. When the bailiff called Maria's name, she froze. Sarah could see the panic building in the little girl's eyes as she looked toward the courtroom door. Without hesitation, Rex stood up and gently nudged Maria's hand with his nose, reminding her that she wasn't alone. The simple gesture seemed to give her the strength she needed to stand up and walk toward her chance to tell the truth. Judge Morrison had agreed to allow Rex to accompany each child to the witness stand, something that was highly unusual, but had proven necessary during the pre-trial preparation. As Maria took her seat, Rex positioned himself beside the witness chair, close enough for her to touch but not so close as to be distracting to the jury. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, had worked extensively with Sarah and the social services team to prepare questions that would allow the children to tell their stories without being re-traumatized. She began with simple questions about Maria's name and age, allowing the little girl to get comfortable with the process before moving to more difficult topics. When Walsh asked Maria to describe what life was like in the warehouses, the courtroom fell completely silent. Maria's voice was small but clear as she explained how she had been told that sleeping on the streets was dangerous, and that working in the warehouses was the only way to stay safe. She described the long hours, the inadequate food, and the constant threats that she would be abandoned if she didn't work hard enough. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, suggesting that Maria had been treated well, and that she had chosen to stay in the warehouses because it was better than being homeless. But every time the lawyer's voice became harsh or demanding, Rex would shift slightly, drawing Maria's attention and reminding her that she was safe. The dog's presence seemed to give her the confidence to stick to her story and clearly state that she had never wanted to be in the warehouses and had always been afraid. Marcus testified next, and his account of life under the highway overpass before being recruited to the warehouses brought several jury members to tears. He explained how the warehouse operators had promised him regular meals and a warm place to sleep, but had instead forced him to work with dangerous materials while threatening to call the police on him if he tried to leave. The most powerful moment came when Marcus was asked why he had finally decided to trust Officer Martinez and Rex during the rescue. His answer was simple but profound. The dog looked at me like I was worth saving. Nobody had looked at me like that for a really long time. Each child's testimony revealed new details about the systematic nature of the exploitation they had suffered. The warehouse operators had carefully selected homeless children, who they believed no one would miss or look for. They had used a combination of false promises, psychological manipulation, and outright threats to maintain control over kids who had nowhere else to go. Rex's role in the courtroom went beyond just providing comfort to the child witnesses. His presence seemed to humanize the entire legal process for everyone in the room. Jury members later said that seeing how the dog responded to each child helped them understand the genuine trauma these kids had experienced and the courage it took for them to testify. The defense team's strategy of portraying the children as willing participants in the warehouse operation fell apart completely when faced with the children's own testimony. It became clear that these were not kids who had made informed choices about their living and working conditions, but rather vulnerable minors who had been systematically exploited by adults who took advantage of their desperation and lack of options. Dr. Williams testified as an expert witness about the medical and psychological evidence of abuse and neglect that she had documented during the children's initial examinations. She explained how malnutrition, exposure to toxic materials, and chronic stress had affected their physical development and mental health. Her testimony provided the scientific foundation that supported everything the children had described about their experiences. Sarah's testimony focused on the conditions she and Rex had observed during the rescue operation and the investigation that followed. She described the dangerous working environment, the inadequate living conditions, and the clear evidence that the children were being held against their will through a combination of threats and psychological manipulation. When the prosecutor asked Sarah to describe Rex's role in the rescue and recovery process, she spoke about the unique bond between the dog and the traumatized children. She explained how Rex's gentle nature had helped the kids trust law enforcement and social services workers, making it possible for them to receive the help they needed to begin healing. The trial lasted 8 days, with testimony from all 8 child witnesses, multiple expert witnesses, and extensive evidence about the warehouse operation. Throughout the entire process, Rex remained a steady, calming presence for the children who were reliving their trauma in order to seek justice. As the trial moved toward closing arguments, it was clear that the prosecution had built an overwhelming case against the 6 defendants. But more importantly, the process had given the rescued children a chance to reclaim their voices and their power, with Rex serving as their faithful companion through one of the most difficult experiences of their young lives. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges against the 6 warehouse operators. As the judge read each verdict aloud, Sarah watched the faces of the children who had found the courage to testify. Instead of joy or celebration, she saw relief, the deep, exhausted relief that comes when a long nightmare finally ends. Rex seemed to sense the emotional weight of the moment. The German Shepherd moved quietly from child to child in the courtroom gallery, offering gentle comfort as they processed the reality that their former captors would be going to prison for a very long time. The sentences ranged from 8 to 15 years, with additional requirements for restitution to help fund ongoing care and therapy for the victims, but the end of the trial was just the beginning of a new chapter for both the rescued children and the partnership between Sarah and Rex. The success of their animal-assisted support program had attracted attention from law enforcement agencies across the state, and requests were pouring in for training and consultation on similar programs. Maria had become something of a poster child for recovery and resilience, though Sarah was careful to protect her privacy and ensure that her healing remained the top priority. The little girl who had once hidden behind cardboard boxes was now thriving in school, making friends, and even taking swimming lessons, something she had mentioned dreaming about during her darkest days in the warehouses. The Rodriguez family had officially adopted Maria 3 months after the trial, giving her the permanent family she had been searching for since her biological parents lost custody years earlier. Rex continued to visit regularly, not just as a therapy dog, but as a beloved family friend who had played a crucial role in bringing them all together. Marcus had a more challenging recovery journey, struggling with anxiety and trust issues that required ongoing therapy. However, his foster family, the Johnsons, had made a commitment to support him through the difficult process of learning to believe in his own worth and future. Rex's weekly visits remained an important part of Marcus's healing routine, providing a consistent source of unconditional acceptance and comfort. The success stories weren't limited to the children who had testified in court. All 14 rescued kids were making progress in their new lives, though each at their own pace and in their own way. Some had been reunited with family members who were now in better positions to care for them. Others had found permanent placements with foster families who specialized in caring for children with trauma. Histories Dr. Williams had begun documenting the long-term effects of animal-assisted therapy in trafficking victims, creating a research study that would help other communities develop similar programs. Her preliminary findings showed that children who had regular interaction with therapy animals recovered more quickly from trauma symptoms and were more successful in their educational and social development. The warehouse district had been transformed as well. The buildings where the children had been exploited were torn down and replaced with a community center that focused on serving homeless youth and preventing exploitation. The center included emergency shelter beds, educational programs, job training for older teens, and a full-time social worker who specialized in identifying and helping children at risk of trafficking. Sarah found herself traveling frequently to speak at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement officers and social workers. She always brought Rex with her, as their partnership had become a powerful example of how innovative approaches could make a real difference in the lives of vulnerable children. The German Shepherd seemed to enjoy these presentations, often demonstrating his gentle interaction skills with volunteer participants. One of the most meaningful developments was the expansion of the therapy dog program to include other police departments in the region. Sarah helped train 5 additional K9 units in animal-assisted support techniques, creating a network of law enforcement officers who could respond to child trafficking cases with specialized skills and resources. The legal precedent set by allowing Rex in the courtroom had also opened doors for other therapy animals to support child witnesses in criminal cases. Judge Morrison had written a detailed opinion explaining the legal and practical justifications for animal-assisted support in courtrooms, providing guidance for other judges facing similar requests. Rex's fame had grown beyond the local community, with news stories and social media posts, sharing photos and videos of his gentle interactions with the rescued children. However, Sarah was careful to maintain focus on the serious work they were doing, rather than turning Rex into just a feel-good story for public consumption. The most important measure of their success was the continued healing and growth of the children they had helped rescue. Regular follow-up visits showed that all 14 kids were making progress in school, developing healthy relationships with their caregivers, and learning to trust that adults could be sources of support rather than exploitation. 1 year after the warehouse rescue, the community held a celebration at the new youth center built on the site of the former warehouses. The event honored not just the successful prosecution of the traffickers, but also the ongoing work to prevent similar exploitation from happening to other children. Maria, now confident and articulate, spoke to the gathered crowd about the importance of never giving up on children who seemed lost or forgotten. She thanked Sarah and Rex for showing her that there were adults who would fight for her safety and happiness without asking for anything in return. Her words brought tears to many eyes, but they also inspired new volunteers and advocates to join the cause of protecting vulnerable youth. As Sarah looked around the crowded community center, watching Rex interact gently with dozens of children and adults, she reflected on how much had changed since that cold Tuesday morning, when they first noticed small figures moving between abandoned warehouses. The rescue operation had saved 14 children, but the ripple effects of their work were continuing to spread throughout the community and beyond. 2 years after the warehouse rescue, Sarah received a letter that would remind her why she and Rex had chosen to dedicate their careers to protecting the most vulnerable members of their community. The letter was from Maria, now 11 years old and thriving in her adoptive home. But it wasn't just a simple thank you note. Maria had organized her entire 5th grade class to write letters to homeless children in their city, and she was asking if Sarah and Rex could help deliver them to kids who might need encouragement and support. The letter included detailed plans for a fundraiser to provide care packages with food, warm clothes, and comfort items for youth living on the streets. When Sarah and Rex visited Maria's school to discuss the project, they found a classroom full of children who had been deeply affected by learning about homelessness and exploitation. Maria had become an advocate and educator, sharing her story in age-appropriate ways to help her classmates understand how they could make a difference in their community. The Care Package project grew into a citywide initiative that involved multiple schools, community organizations, and local businesses. Rex became the unofficial mascot for the program, appearing at fundraising events and helping to distribute supplies to homeless youth throughout the metropolitan area. His presence helped bridge the gap between housed children who wanted to help and homeless kids who were often suspicious of well-meaning adults. Marcus, now 15, had channeled his own recovery into advocacy work as well. He had started a peer support group for teens who had experienced trafficking or exploitation, with Rex serving as a therapy animal during their weekly meetings. Marcus's group had helped identify and rescue 3 other children who were being exploited in different parts of the city, demonstrating that the effects of their work continued to expand in ways no one had originally anticipated. The animal-assisted support program that had begun with Sarah and Rex had grown into a regional network involving 23 K-9 units across 4 states. Sarah found herself serving as a national consultant on animal-assisted law enforcement techniques, traveling to train officers and social workers in communities dealing with similar trafficking problems. Rex, now 7 years old and considered a veteran therapy dog, had become a legend in law enforcement circles. His gentle approach to traumatized children had been featured in training videos used by police academies across the country. Despite his fame, the German Shepherd remained focused on his work, seeming to understand that every child he met was depending on him to provide the comfort and security they needed to begin healing. The warehouse district had become a model for community-based approaches to preventing child exploitation. The youth center built on the former site of the warehouses now served over 200 homeless teens each year, providing emergency shelter, educational support, job training, and long-term housing assistance. Most importantly, it had become a place where vulnerable young people could find adults who were committed to their safety and success. Dr. Williams had published her research on animal-assisted therapy for trafficking victims in several peer-reviewed journals, providing scientific evidence for what Sarah and Rex had demonstrated through their daily work. Her studies showed that children who received animal-assisted support recovered from trauma symptoms 40% faster than those who received traditional therapy alone. The legal system had also evolved in response to the precedent set during the warehouse operators trial. Judges in 12 states had allowed therapy animals to support child witnesses in criminal cases, and legislation was pending in several others to formalize the practice. The courthouse where Rex had first accompanied Maria to testify now had a dedicated space for therapy animals and their handlers, but perhaps the most meaningful change was in the children themselves. All 14 of the original warehouse victims had not only survived their trauma, but had found ways to transform their experiences into sources of strength and purpose. Several had become advocates for other vulnerable children, while others had pursued education and career paths that would allow them to prevent similar exploitation in the future. Sarah often reflected on how a routine patrol in the warehouse district had changed not just her career, but her understanding of what it meant to serve and protect the community. Rex had taught her that sometimes the most powerful law enforcement tool wasn't a weapon or a badge, but simply the willingness to approach others with gentleness and unconditional acceptance. On the 3rd anniversary of the rescue, Sarah and Rex returned to the site where they had first encountered Maria, hiding behind cardboard boxes. The area was now a playground adjacent to the youth center, filled with children playing safely under the supervision of caring adults. As they watched kids laughing and running around the same space where exploitation had once occurred, Sarah realized that their work had come full circle. Rex, despite being older and moving a bit more slowly, still lit up whenever children approached him. His tail would wag gently as young voices called his name, and he would carefully position himself so that every child who wanted to pet him could do so safely. The German Shepherd had never lost his ability to sense which children needed extra comfort or attention. Maria, now almost 12 and confident in ways that would have been unimaginable during her warehouse days, had become Rex's unofficial publicity manager. She organized his social media presence, wrote articles about animal-assisted therapy for the school newspaper, and spoke at conferences about the important role that Rex had played in her recovery and advocacy work. As Sarah looked at the thriving community that had grown from the ashes of exploitation and trauma, she knew that she and Rex had found their true calling. They had proven that law enforcement could be about more than just catching criminals. It could be about healing communities, protecting the vulnerable, and creating hope where there had been only despair. The warehouse rescue had ended years ago, but its impact continued to ripple outward, touching new lives and creating new possibilities for children who had previously been invisible to society. Rex's gentle heart had not only saved 14 children from immediate danger, but had helped create a model for compassionate law enforcement that would protect countless others in the years to come.